Well, welcome to our campfire on regenerative economics as we explore efforts towards more mindful, compassionate and cooperative worldviews in financial systems. We're really delighted that you've all joined us today, and a really special welcome to those who are coming to the fireside for the first time. My name is Susan Prescott and I'm Director of the Nova Network and a Professor at the University of Western Australia. Before we get started, I wish to begin with our customary acknowledgement to celebrate the spirit of people, places and planet. We come from many places and many traditions, so we like to acknowledge and celebrate all wisdom, past, present and emerging, and the spirit of the earth that sustains all of us with great love, gratitude and respect. So thank you. Our campfires are really wonderful opportunities to share a variety of topics and build connectivity and community and find opportunities in the many challenges that we are facing as we seek better ways of being and doing. This event is our second collaboration with the Garrison Institute, and I want to thank Jonathan Rose, Chairman of the Garrison Institute, and Stephen Posner, Director of Pathways to Planetary Health at Garrison, for their collaboration, and of course to Sandra Tiedemann, Program Director of Compassionate Leadership at Finance at Garrison, who is also one of our panellists today. It's really wonderful that the Garrison Institute shares our priority of addressing deeper values as a critical part of meaningful change across many sectors of society for the common good, recognising the power of connecting resident communities like ours to magnify the importance of kinder, integrated narratives, approaches to challenges across all scales from person to planet. And as always, we're very grateful to the Nova Institute for hosting these activities. So I would like to invite the President of the Nova Institute, Brian Berman, to add a few words of welcome. Thank you, Brian.
The Nova Institute is a heart-centered think tank that takes action for the good of people, places, and the planet. And one of our main strategies is to facilitate forums like this one, where we can talk about important issues, connect with others, and discover solutions that move us forward. You might be wondering, why is a medical doctor talking about business, economics, and marketing? Well, I've spent more than 4 decades focused on the evidence-based practice of whole person care and increasing awareness about the many factors that influence health. And I've learned that in order to make change, real systemic change, we must work across different sectors and find better ways of doing things to improve the health for everyone. And when I hear about businesses that measure success, not just by looking at finances, but at how they focus on the triple bottom line, people, profits, and our planet, I know we're getting to the heart of Nova's mission. We've all seen too many examples of how negative business practices can harm the interconnected web of people, places, and the planet. And at the same time, regenerative-minded businesses have an enormous opportunity to play a positive role in this cycle and lead the way for others to follow. So I'm really excited to learn about these opportunities today. So I thank you, Susan, for gathering us. I thank you to all of our presenters and to all of you for being here. And after the campfire is over, I hope you'll join us on our Nova Integration Hub and continue the discussion at hub.novainstituteforhealth.org. So back over to you, Susan.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. Now, to help bring us into a connected, balanced head-heart space, Rick Scott's going to lead us through a mindful moment. Thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you, Susan. So let's begin by finding a comfortable position. Just take a moment to calm your body and your mind. Take a few relaxing breaths. And if you would like to, gently close your eyes or allow your gaze to soften. Just bring your attention to the fact that you are breathing, becoming aware of the movement of the breath as it enters your body and as it leaves your body. No need to change your breathing in any way. And as we sit in silence for the next few moments, Just give full attention and full care to each in-breath and to each out-breath as they flow one after the other in a never-ending, life-giving cycle. And when you're ready, return your attention to this space and gently open your eyes, feeling relaxed and refreshed.
Thank you very much, Rick, for creating that space for us to bring our whole selves. So now, just to overview our schedule, I'm going to kick off the panel with my 5-minute introduction just to frame the topic, and then our panel of speakers will each share their, their perspectives for around 5 minutes each. And this will be followed by discussion, which is the most important part, because we know there are many others on the call with important perspectives. So to ensure we have plenty of time, we ask the panelists try and keep to that time. So now we're just going to kick off with my introduction. Thank you very much.
The purpose of this campfire is to explore how financial and economic systems can support flourishing of people, places and planet by aligning with the interests of individuals, communities and the diverse environments that we depend on. Natural ecosystems thrive on dynamic flow of energy across a diverse web of life, just as human communities best flourish with flow of resources grounded in similar principles of balanced transactional reciprocity for the common good. However, in progressively more hierarchical and feudalistic societies, wealth has been concentrated away from the grassroots, usually taking with it power, freedom and resources. And we can see the long shadows of this in modern economies, with growing extremes and disparities of wealth and well-being. Now, most of the global wealth and vast financial assets are locked in trusts or sequestered capital and no longer serving communities in greatest need of those resources. This has occurred in parallel with the rise of marketing and manufactured hyper-consumerism across the 20th century and the growth of industries directly undermining human and environmental health with profit-driven pandemics, tobacco and ultra-processed foods, perhaps the most obvious impacting human health, particularly non-communicable diseases, and the impact of petrochemical industries on environmental degradation. But there are many others, all facilitated by financial systems which have flourished in a culture of greed is good, often at the expense of grassroots flourishing. But we have reached a point where there is fortunately general recognition that this is no longer sustainable and no longer in the interests of humanity or our environment. There are increasing calls to unlock stagnant, sequestered resources, not only to restore fairness, but also to restore damaged environments and communities and health at all scales. The move to environmental restoration and rewilding is being extended to financial systems through movements towards more compassionate finance and regenerative economics, which we're going to hear more about from our speakers today. As with our many previous discussions, this reflects the need for greater awareness of the interdependence of all systems, most of which depend on our financial systems to function, and the recurring theme of cultural change to achieve systems change, and of course, greater consideration of the commercial determinants of health on every scale. The will to change may be driven by necessity, social or financial pressure, or, we hope, an authentic desire for deeper change. But if actions are still driven by greed and merely redirected exploitation, we will not have achieved the shift in consciousness that is needed. Again, highlighting the importance of deep-seated shifts in values. We recently explored this in our paper on dispositional greed and corporate greed as major threats to planetary health. and how individual dispositional greed clusters and magnifies at scale to promote a culture of organisational greed, especially in sectors such as banking, insurance, real estate, and extractive industries, all likely to score higher on the dark triad characteristics of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy compared to individuals and groups in healthcare, education, and civil service. The large-scale population trends for increasing narcissism and declining empathy for others and the environment do reveal that collective attitudes and personality traits can shift over time, offering hope that more evolved and compassionate approaches are possible. Increasing awareness is important for this, so it is promising to see rising awareness and acceptance of practices such as mindfulness, as this is associated with lower dispositional greed. Empathy can also be taught, and as with other determinants of health, these mindsets have early life origins and mirror cultural values and priorities. Early life interventions can therefore provide an important part of moral and social education. Mindful parenting, emphasising compassion and empathy, does associate with lower levels of greed among children and adolescents. This, of course, all builds on discussions from our previous campfire where we talked about the importance of emphasising intrinsic life goals of kindness, hope and love and empathy over purely extrinsic and materialistic goals, which also lead to greater life satisfaction and happiness and health of individuals and community. Again, we return to calls for new and kinder narratives that support and align the health of people, places and planet rather than undermine it. So these are some of the principles to consider as we hear from our colleagues working in economics, business and marketing about how we can achieve more compassionate, equitable, sustainable and mutually beneficial approaches to the financial lifeblood that we need to enact all this. Each speaker will talk for 5 minutes and I don't want to detract from their time by reading their bios, so I urge you to read more about them at the link in the chat. And first, it's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca Henderson, a prominent economist from Harvard University, to share her perspectives on all of this. Thank you, Rebecca.
Susan, thank you for that wonderful presentation and the thoughts you outline. I fear that what I'm about to say will seem very evident to the people on this call, but perhaps it will be surprising that it is I that is saying it. My name is Rebecca Henderson. I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School. I recently published a book called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. It's a book that suggests that the business community can play a major role in solving the problems that we face. And as I listen to you, Susan, and as I think now about that book, what strikes me is how very much it relies on self-interest. For 20 years, I've worked with businesses trying to persuade them to address the climate change and the massive problems we face. And I've learned the hard way that the place to start is with the economics. And I believe the economics are strong, that there is a business case for addressing climate change and inequality. And I could talk at length, but will not, about the business models that allow firms to do that. But in 20 years of grappling with this problem, and more recently in giving talks across the world based around my book, I've come to believe that rationality is not enough. I'm an economist and an engineer, so to say this is a tough thing for me to say. But even though I think that every business person on the planet should be aware that we need to address these massive problems and that they can make money while doing so, as everybody knows, it's not happening. And I have come to the reluctant conclusion, as an economist and an engineer, that we need to activate the other side of our natures. That in a culture which, as your video highlighted so clearly, Susan, in a culture that has so long valued competitiveness, cognitive ability, analytic skills, and significantly downplayed empathy, connection, love, and caring, that we really need to rewrite that balance. Well, why? as I've worked with many, many businesses, I've seen that even if there is a clear business case, it's very difficult to embrace it without taking risks, without having a vision for the longer term, without being willing to cooperate, both within the organization and with others in the industry, or with employees or with competitors. Solving these massive problems requires, and this is easy to say and hard to do, public-private cooperation at scale. It requires cooperation among competitors in the service of the common good by, for example, stopping deforestation or switching to renewable energy. And all of this is so countercultural to the dominant narrative that it needs, I've come to believe, what I and many other people in business call the embrace of a shared purpose. But let's be specific as to why we need this other way of thinking, why we need to call on this other side of ourselves. Firstly, because so many people are stuck in fear, despair, and rage at what's happening. It's happening at such a scale and it's happening so fast that many people, and I include in this people very senior in their organizations, feel almost powerless, caught in a system that they feel gives them very little autonomy or agency. And to lose yourself in despair or rage is to deny your own agency and make it very hard to act in more fruitful or more productive ways. So we need a way of holding these very difficult emotions that come up at any time of challenge. We need, as you and your colleagues and others at the Garrison Institute are working on so clearly, a narrative of hope, a narrative of love. We need a massive rebalancing towards the other side. Let's call it left mode, right mode. Let's call it from being individualistic to being cooperative. Let's call it a shift to love. Because otherwise, and this is the economist in me, we cannot solve the cooperative problems we face. For thousands of years, and it's sobering to remember that the modern human race is only about 200,000 years old, for nearly 196,000 years, humans lived in small groups, stressing cooperation and relationship, connection to the transcendent, common ritual, music and dance, ways of being human that were not about being analytic, competitive, and status-seeking. Not that being analytic and competitive is bad. I wrote and I continue to believe that we need modern capitalism to solve the problems that we face, but we need it to be controlled and bounded by a much wider view of what it means to be human and how we as individuals should act and what we owe each other. So I believe the title of my 5 minutes was Why We Need a Massive Moral and Spiritual Awakening to Save Capitalism. All I can say is we will not succeed without it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing those very powerful perspectives that give us real hope that systemic change is possible and remind us that it will be easier and only possible if we're unafraid to literally speak to the heart of the matter and focus finding our shared humanity. And when we do that, so much more is possible. Thank you. I'm now delighted to introduce my new friend and colleague, Dave Webb, from the Business School at the University of Western Australia. As so often happens, we've been at the same university for many, many years, but our planetary health paths have only just recently crossed. And we're both looking forward to working more closely together now. Dave is going to talk about the important role of marketing narratives for restorative and regenerative business. And thank you for staying up so late, Dave.
Well, it's great to be here on this my inaugural Campfire presentation, and also to join many other scholars working in the same areas as myself. I started actually as a marketer, Historically, if I think about the kind of conversations that I've been involved in over the years, within the sort of circles of people that I revolve around in, to the question, what do you do? When I respond that I'm a marketer, I'm usually met with raised eyebrows, some kind of horrified look, and people take themselves off to do something much more important that they'd forgotten that they had to do. And for me, this represents a sort of a common, if you like, a narrative that's associated with marketing that for the last 26 years, I've been working towards changing the sort of, I guess, areas that you see here in front of you, from marketing's the evil of society to marketing being responsible for excessive materialism or undermining people's self-worth or the image they hold about themselves, pushing people onto a never-ending satisfaction treadmill from which they can't escape. And of course, sometimes that's true. As a tool and a technique, marketing can be complicit in that. So when we go back to the origins of this and we take a look at the marketing concept itself, which is how marketing is conceptualized and how marketing activities are guided, we see over the passage of time that marketing's gone through a number of evolutions. You don't, not expecting you to be reading all the text here, but from the earlier conceptualizations, we see a focus that's predominantly on customer satisfaction, the introduction of the recognition of the importance of value to consumers, and then later still a recognition that we need to go further into a more macro view. And that's when we start finding marketing talking about well-being and quality of life and that sort of thing. And this is going back to the early 90s, but parallel to this, in a different part of the world and with a different set of priorities, I was defining marketing for myself in a working context and for sharing with students, and recognized that the ultimate purpose of marketing systems has to be sitting in a global economy about enhancing quality of life. And so these two definitions that I developed in 1997 and 2011 are differentiated in only to the extent to which 2011 we start recognizing the interdependency of consumers and other actors within that global marketing system. And so the idea of co-creating solutions comes to the forefront. So we've seen within the marketing realm, we've seen an advancement towards recognition of importance of well-being. And these are the sorts of narratives that we need to see to continue, but we need an element of genuineness that perhaps is often missing to be integrated. So these might be epitomized by the sort of question that I've included at the bottom: how does I or what we do positively or negatively impact on the well-being of customers or equivalent clients, patients, etc., and those with whom we do business or engage, or society overall, as well as the planet, and how should we respond in that regard? So marketing, when we think about how it's implemented, itself has gone through a number of transitional shifts over time. I'm not going to go into any great detail on these, but we can see that the emphasis from the 1800s all the way through to the 1970s, there is an overlap here, is sort of consistent with that, with what I was talking about a second ago in terms of the marketing concept. From the 70s onwards, we see much more of a societal orientation, a greater emphasis on social systems, a greater emphasis on the environment, but predominantly still sitting in a very sort of a corporate competitive mindset. And clearly, from what we've heard from previous speakers, we need a different perspective. We need a different narrative, one that is more consistent with what I refer to as a restorative and regenerative orientation. And for the purpose of this particular presentation, I've developed if you like, a working definition. So I see regenerative marketing occurring when governments, organizations, and individuals co-create value propositions and enable all elements within a defined ecosystem to flourish. And so that's what I'm going to be using moving forward as a working definition. Of course, it will change as our understanding changes. And the key issue now for myself and for others to think about is, how do we go about implementing that? We need to change the conversation we have also about ourselves as consumers and actors in the global economy. So what would it mean to think of ourselves as producers of planetary health and wealth, and as actors, as active co-creators of value, as value exchange partners linked in a network of service exchange possibilities, rather than as consumers of planetary resources? And that's a very different take on things. We think of ourselves as consumers. How about we think of ourselves as active contributors and producers in opposition? So would our preoccupation with consumption change? I raise that as a proposition, a hypothesis, if you like, for testing. I suspect it probably will, but it will take a lot of work. It'll take a lot of self-reflective work by individuals too. And that's not something that marketing is going to change, but that's something for all of us collectively across our different areas of multidisciplinary to work on together. So the final message is, if we want a just and regenerative world in which all of the ecosystem elements flourish, we need to explore with wisdom and compassion how collectively we can create that new ontology, a new way of being, a new reality which is reinforced with new realities. That'll require a platform for conversation about constituent elements such as marketing, which is just one part of the bigger whole. And this is where I would talk about giving voice to values, but that'll have to wait for another campfire. And I'll hand over at that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dave. And this community has been advocating for the importance of value systems in your closing comment there, in efforts to align the health and prosperity of people, places and planet with fairness and compassion. And we were actually so inspired by the work that you've been doing. And Mary Gentile is also on the call today, the author of Giving Voice to Values. So we see this as really core to aspects of planetary health, and we in the discussion, we really want to invite Mary later on to have an opportunity to comment on this. And speaking of compassion in finance, I'm delighted to introduce our next panelist, Sandra Tiedemann, the Program Director of Compassionate Leadership in Finance, CLIF, at the Garrison Institute here in New York, who's going to talk about his inspiring work on mindfulness-based leadership in the financial industry to transform the sector for a force for good. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all. Thank you, Rebecca and David, for paving the way. What I will say very much build on your ideas and your insights. All right, so I'll talk about compassionate systems leadership. Indeed, I'm leading a program at Garrison Institute called Compassionate Leadership in Finance, CLIF. And I'm also an author of a recent book that very much deals with all these questions we're discussing today, triple value. And I'll share a couple of the models and insights that are in this book. And I'll talk also a little bit about the program that we are leading. And of course, this is why we do the work. This is basically what you all said in your previous presentations, but we're facing a poly crisis. That is, of course, a very complex systemic challenge that we are facing with many different symptoms and facets. You can say many of them are appearing on a systems level, but we also see them at an organizational level. And that's both bad and good news, because business leaders and finance leaders, they will have to deal with them. And they are dealing with them. And they show up in concepts and discussions like sustainability, ESG, but also the war on talent and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, the whole mental health discussion, of course, the pandemic, it's it's not completely gone. It has completely uprooted idea about work-life balance and working from home. And then in the background, there is this huge new development called AI that is also impacting our current business models and our current economic models in a radical way. So the key insight, I think, is that all these challenges are systemic. They have no single cause, and therefore there's also no single solution. They're impossible to solve by any individual or by any organization. Yet at the same time, they're impossible to ignore. And that's why we're on this call. In a way, we cannot ignore that. And that is an act of leadership, of individual and collective leadership. But then the question rises, what kind of leadership? And this is one business leader that has a wonderful quote. You cannot succeed as a leader in a system that fails. So this failing system is a challenge for leadership, is an obligation for leadership. The way we look at this is by zooming into the purpose of the system. I think this is an interesting quote of Donella Meadows. Very interesting. She was one of the co-authors of the Club of Rome Limits to Growth report many years ago. And it's important to reflect on that. The least obvious part of the system, its function of purpose, is often the most determinant of the system behavior. Therefore, if you want to change a system, you have to change its purpose. Now, what is the purpose of our current predominant economic system? And you can also say our financial system. And it's, if you bring it down into its essence, it is simply a triangle between production, consumption, and capital. The purpose is to generate and accumulate as much capital as possible. And that's why we are stuck with a system that is just growth obsessed, right? That is how we've structured most of our capitalistic economies and most of our organizations, right? And mostly that is also enshrined in laws and institutions. So it's not simply up to the individual to change. At the same time, what you see, that is its purpose right now. And that's why we are facing what economists call a market failure, right? Because the growth, the triangle of growth, the purpose that is basically behind our business and by our market economies is not to serve society and our planet. Simply not its purpose. The purpose is to grow and accumulate capital. Now, but this is changing, as I said. The triangle of growth is being challenged by many new forces, and you can say is being forced to create a new purpose or to find a new purpose. Of course, nature, climate, biodiversity, ESG is coming in, new needs from society, and there are many new different value creation models. And so we are in what you call a systems crisis, but also in a moral or our purpose crisis, if you like. But the key here is this question mark. What is now the new purpose of the system that we need to discover and cultivate? I call it the repurposing of our economy. And I can also say repurposing of the financial system. I take it a little bit broader, but in capitalism, the financial sector and the economy are completely intertwined. So I won't really differentiate. In our programs, we do. But here, I think it's more important to see the broader perspective. Now, there is, when we talk about the how to repurpose the system, there is an enormous, important new paradigm shift in science emerging. And that is, in economic terms, is the end of the Homo economicus, the demise of the Homo economicus, the notion that we are rational, individualistic, and selfish beings, which is an intellectual underpinning of our economic system, is being replaced by the notion that we are Homo sapiens, conscious beings in a changing context. And that means that, as a Homo sapiens, we are, our true nature is social connectedness, interconnectedness, and creativity. That's our natural state. That's basically discovery of neuroscience. Also, as conscious beings, we have potential. There is incredible human potential that can grow. Consciousness is limitless. Consciousness doesn't have any form or shape. Therefore, it has no limitations. And it can grow and it can develop. And that's also conscious. That's neuroscience, psychology, pedagogy. There is a lot of science that supports that now. which means that leadership can be developed. All right, that's the most important takeaway here. And this is the sort of model that we created, the sort of compassionate leadership, systems leadership model that we created based on science, on the new sciences, on this new economic or scientific insight. So first of all, we can become aware of this web of life, the web of stakeholders, the value chain, if you like, from shareholders, which we are preoccupied with now, serving, the accumulation of capital. But we can expand that to the needs of the employees, customers, society, and planet as a whole. So that's the open mind dimension of the consciousness that we need to develop. At the same time, there is the need for what you can call an open heart. The motivation needs to change. Now, as David already said, we are not just consumers, we're contributors. That's also part of our human nature. We want to share, we want to contribute to others, to the environment. And that's a progression from indifference to empathy and ultimately to compassion. There's a little bit of a step between empathy and compassion. I won't go in, but it's definitely something that is trainable and developable and part of leadership training these days. So if we are able to cultivate our open mind and open heart, then we will have impact on the system. Simple as that. Now, I won't share the whole model, but this is a model we are using in our programs where, as I said, we move from empathy to compassion, which is empathy is an emotion, is a very strong driver of human behavior. But compassion comes with analysis and comes with a sense of wisdom, where we analyze the causes of suffering or analyze the needs of our communities, of the people around our systems, our organizations, and we are looking for ways to serve those needs and to find, solutions to their problems. So that then basically empathy turns into compassion, and compassion leads to action, becomes a motivation to act, and that's where compassion and leadership start to intersect. And if we bring that to a systems level, then we are here talking about, of course, cultivating compassion for ourselves as a sort of the foundation. We are part of the ecosystem, we're part of the web of life, right? And we are the instrument of change, so we need to take care of ourselves. But at the same time, we need to take care of our connections, our relationships in teams, in organizations, compassion for others. But then on top of that, we need to learn how to cultivate compassion for the system, the entire ecosystem and society and all the needs of all the species in that system. And all these three levels can be trained. Now, and I already said this. So what we try to do, just to keep a long story short, just a little bit of a marketing pitch here. We are training currently. We're working, I must say, because this is very much a relational thing with executives in the financial sector that do understand the need for repurposing their organizations, for repurposing the systems, but they also understand that it starts with themselves and that they need to discover and develop their own inner purpose and develop their own compassionate systems awareness. So this is what we currently do at Garrison Institute, and this is our faculty, and basically this is some of the resources we have. So I want to stop share here and.
Thank you so much, Sander, for reinforcing the themes of inner development, wisdom and compassion. And I think your work speaks to the power of integrating insights from Eastern philosophies and neuroscience to transform business, but I'm sure it also transforms the physical, emotional and spiritual health of the individuals that you're working with as well. Next, we have a special short video message from Amaka Agbo, who's not able to join us today. Her work and the work at Katali Foundation embodies community-centered approaches to restorative economics, particularly for healing vulnerable communities. So we're going to there's a short video, we'll just play that now. Thanks, Lachlan.
So one of my earliest memories involves one of our family trips to Nigeria. We would go to my father's village, and in the village One of the things that I was just so stunned by was to recognize that there was this whole community of people, and we were all relatives. We were aunts, uncles, cousins, husbands and wives, all living in close proximity to each other. It really highlights the importance of governing and stewarding land together in a community, and recognizing the importance of land to sovereignty and self-determination and liberation, and being place-based with a community of people that share your values, that are also invested in your well-being and happiness and wholeness. Those early experiences caused me to question, are there other ways of us to be in a relationship to one another and with the land? My work of restorative economics is being able to kind of challenge the model of individual wealth and figure out, can we create shared prosperity? Can we create community wealth? And can we do that in a way in which we are bringing groups of people, community members, friends and family together around stewarding a shared asset, as opposed to control and ownership by one individual of an asset for exploitation of the profit. That's kind of the shift that I'm hoping restorative economics can create, that as we are hopefully reinvesting resources back into those most disinvested communities, we're doing it in a way in which it licenses them to have stewardship and governance over their local assets. A lot of our current economy is one in which we have decision makers in one sphere, right? And then we have impacted people who are shaped by those decisions in another sphere. I like to work with communities to figure out, what does it take to overlap those audiences, to overlap those spheres, so that the impacted population are actually the individuals making the decisions. Because we'll make different and better decisions for our neighbors, for the environment, when those circles overlap. When we center the needs and interests of the most impacted populations and make decisions that provide dignity and good quality of life and well-being for that population, we're most likely to have a society in which all people are doing better for the long term. The work that I do is about really finding spaces and ways in which we are able to come together to create community wealth and to create community governance, so that we can have sovereign spaces, self-determination, and shared prosperity for all people. My role is to help people implement that vision. So I provide project management support, strategic guidance. I've had groups reach out to me to figure out, we would like to create a community-governed investment fund. What does it look like to bring a set of grassroots organizations together to govern the management of those resources to invest in our local community? And now is an opportunity to start writing some new stories, because climate is shifting, borders are shifting, people are transforming, and so we need to write the new stories for what we want the next chapter of our society, of our communities to look like.
Well, we're very, very grateful to Amaka and the Katali Foundation for sharing their video with us, which really shows that shift towards the grassroots community-based initiatives. Next, I'm really delighted to introduce Kate Rudd. We always love inviting young people to share their vision and inspirations and their work to make a difference in the world. And Kate is already making strides in her efforts. And she's going to talk about the importance of education and inner development in enabling economic transition. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you so much for holding this space today, and thank you to all of the other panelists for sharing this amazing knowledge and for starting, opening these incredibly important conversations. So I'm going to talk to you all briefly today about the role of inner development in creating the conditions for the socio-economic transition. I'm sure that most of us here today will be in agreement that the major collective challenge facing us in coming decades will be meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet without continuing to overstep the critical Earth system's boundaries. And of course, with that in mind, the UN back in 2015 launched the Sustainable Development Goals, with the aim of building a path towards a sustainable future by 2030. However, progress towards those goals isn't happening anywhere near as fast enough as it needs to be, and it's very unlikely that we're going to meet them. To echo what many of the speakers before me have already mentioned, I think there's growing acknowledgement among the scientific community, and particularly among systems thinkers, that the converging crises we're facing are rooted in mindsets and ways of thinking. And that in order to correct our course, we're going to need to shift our mental models, and we're going to need to develop our collective abilities to work with complexity and in harmony with living systems. And initiatives like the Inner Development Goals are seeking to do exactly that by creating the frameworks for inner development. But the great question is, how do we move from theories and frameworks to practice? And how do we, given the urgency of the challenges that we're facing, what needs to happen to catalyse change on the ground? Well, in my last piece of research, I explored that. I conducted case studies with 9 innovative practitioners of regenerative agriculture who, despite all the odds, making a hugely positive impact on the ecological, social, economic, and cultural systems in which they're working. I employed a maximum diversification strategy, studying innovators with really very diverse profiles and backgrounds to understand what were the common factors that enabled their work. And what I found was that these innovators commonly demonstrate 5 key inner capacities that enable them to engage in their work restoring planetary, human, and economic health. And those inner capacities are awareness, insight, connection, motivation, and a sense of agency. So here you can see a model of change that I created to illustrate the process and the impact of inner development. And I'll explain it to you briefly now. So I think the first thing to note, which is quite important, is that these inner capacities aren't necessarily innate. Not all of the innovators that I spoke with started out in their careers as regenerative farmers, or even farmers at all for that matter. The inner capacities that they demonstrated actually developed over time and with experience, and they reinforced each other in a positive feedback loop. So how were these inner capacities acquired? Well, I found that certain contexts, enabling environments, create the ideal conditions for nurturing these inner capacities. And what I found was that the common enabling environments in which all of the different innovators I spoke to had been immersed were embodied on the land learning about living systems, transformational transdisciplinary learning in different environments, traditional ecological knowledge and or spiritual practice, and participation in collaborative networks. So how does all of this result in outer systems transformation? Well, reaching a certain stage in their inner development where all of the inner capacities that are listed were significantly developed, innovators felt driven and empowered to engage in deeply regenerative work. And in their case, this work was regenerative agriculture, which is a holistic and relational approach to restoring planetary and human health. And the result of their work is a virtuous circle of transformative change, which I call inside-out transformation, whereby the innovators then go on to create enabling environments in which they in turn nurture the inner development of other individuals, while simultaneously deploying scaling strategies to scale their impact to catalyse wider external change in the communities, the institutions, and the systems that they connect with. And to sort of end things, I mean, obviously that's a huge oversimplification of a much more complex process that I would have loved to talk you through in greater detail. I feel like we've really only skimmed the surface here, but I'm aware that we do have very limited time today. So if you're interested in my work, I'd love you to connect with me to discuss this in depth, or otherwise, please feel free to read my research or to look at my other work on Medium. I'll share the links in the chat. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you, Kate. That's very inspiring. And as we think of regenerative work, we need to think of nourishment. And your work spanning food systems and education really addresses that on many levels, body, mind, and soul. So thank you so much. Our final panellist is Kate White, Professor of Marketing and Behavioural Science at UBC, and we're delighted that she's going to share her perspectives on how marketing may be a valuable tool in shifting consumer, or should I say contributor, attitudes and choices for healthier behaviours that are also better for the community and our environment. And thanks very much, Kate.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm joining you from Vancouver, Canada today, and I'm a social psychologist by training, but I teach in marketing and behavioral science. So I'm really interested in how do we get people, so when we're talking about some of these ideas around regenerative marketing or regenerative business, how do we get people to kind of change their behaviors to kind of get in line with those kinds of ideas? And I like that idea of contributor. I have to call them consumers when I'm publishing in marketing journals, but they're people, right? So when I talk about behavior change, I'm just talking about people. One of the things I find again and again in the research that I do is that most people have positive attitudes and intentions around being more sustainable. So when you ask them, they say they want to be sustainable. They actually care about climate change. The majority of people care, they're worried, and they want to change things. However, when you look at behaviors, people don't always follow through with their behaviors. And this is just one example from a recent survey and study where 80% of consumers say they want to make more sustainable choices and switch out to do more sustainable behaviors. But if there's any kind of a cost associated with it, like a price premium, really not very many people do it. Only about 4% of people do these behaviors. And I'm not going to get into the why today because we just don't have time. But what I will do is talk a little bit about maybe some potential solutions to get people to shift their behaviors to be more sustainable. And so what we did in some of our research is we went in and we did a systematic review of the research from consumer behavior, marketing, psychology, and some behavioral economics, and basically looked at what are the factors that actually get people to change their behaviors to be more sustainable. And we took a broad view of consumer behavior. It doesn't just mean buying stuff. It means what are you choosing? What kind of behaviors are you doing when you're using products? How do you dispose of products? All those kinds of things. So it's not just buying stuff. And what we kind of find is that there's these 5 factors that are important. And within each one, there's a lot of nuance. But I'll just tell you about the factors today, just to give you kind of a flavor for what they are. And the framework that we created is called SHIFT. And the idea is that each letter in the acronym SHIFT stands for one of our factors. So the first one is social influence. And this seems to be very powerful in the domain of getting people to be more sustainable. So basically, social influence is how we're impacted by other people. So people tend to engage in more sustainable behaviors when they see other people doing sustainable behaviors, something called descriptive norms, when they believe others want them to be sustainable, and even just the presence of other people makes people more likely to engage in sustainable behaviors. The second one is habit formation, which is all about this idea that a lot of the things we do that aren't sustainable are just these sort of automatic behaviors that we've learned, and they kind of get activated in familiar context in response to cues in those contexts. And we just kind of automatically do these things without thinking about them. And that's part of why we get those intention action gaps, right? We set our intentions when we're thinking really carefully, but in our day-to-day lives, as we're doing actions, we often sort of just do things habitually without even thinking about what and why we're doing them. So there's some different things you can do to shape habits. So things like making behaviors as easy as possible. So can you set things as a default action so that people do the more sustainable thing, for example? The third one is individual self. So this is really understanding what's really important to the person, or if you're communicating out your target audience. Some people really care about sustainability, and that's top of mind for them. So communicating about, green values and the sustainable attributes of a behavior can be important. But sometimes it's figuring out what is important to the person that is linked to sustainability. So maybe it's not sustainability per se, but something else, some other identity or some other value is important to the person. So maybe they care about family, or maybe they care about spending time in nature. Maybe they care about saving money. All of those things can be linked to sustainability. So really understanding what resonates with your target audience. The other one I have there is feelings and cognition, which is all about people's emotions and their thoughts about sustainability. And obviously there's a lot under that category. The one thing I often talk about with feelings is that marketers seem to first use guilt and fear to tell people about sustainability and to try to change behaviors. And what the research seems to show is that some degree of negative information can sort of motivate the desire to change. But if it's too high, if it's too intense, it actually kind of can backfire. People just won't listen to that information. So thinking about other types of emotions that can be used too. So we find that positive things like hope can be effective in changing behavior, and things like feelings of transcendence. So basically feeling connected to a broader, bigger world that's out there. So we have some studies where we find that when people are in nature, they feel more transcendent, and they're more likely to care about things like sustainability and helping others. And then the last one there is tangibility. And so tangibility is all around this idea that when you ask people to be sustainable, or you use a word like sustainability, for most people, it's a very abstract concept. And what I mean by that is people don't really know what behaviors they should do. The outcomes seem far away. They seem uncertain. And it's just hard for people to grasp these kinds of concepts. And so anything you can do to communicate the details. So what are the specific behaviors I could do? Or what if I did the behavior, or perhaps if a collective, a big group of people all did this behavior, what would the impact look like? And so giving as specific examples and details as possible tends to make people more likely to shift their behaviors. So that was a very quick overview of the shift factors. So hopefully I convinced you that those 5 factors can be persuasive in getting people to change their behaviors to be more sustainable.
Well, thank you, Kate. And I think your work illustrates the value of applying these principles across sectors. For example, those of us working in human health know that this is a function of attitudes and behaviours, yet efforts at scale are clearly inadequate and could be magnified by more cross-sectoral approaches involving social psychologists and experts like you. So now we have an opportunity to invite discussion from everyone and from all of our panelists, questions, comments, ideas, inspirations. I do think that Mary Gentili is here with us. And Mary literally wrote the book on giving voice to values, published by Yale University Press. And I know that many would love to hear her reflections on all of this. Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thanks for inviting me to be here today. What an inspiring set of remarks by the 5 panelists. I've been jotting down notes, and what's been encouraging to me is that as I listen to everybody, there's something in everyone's comments that to me sort of reinforces and underlines and sort of makes me feel more confident with the work that we're all trying to do. I call it giving voice to values, but I think we're all doing it in different ways. Rebecca talked about bringing your whole self, and she talked about it in terms of not just economics and engineering, but also in terms of art and music and dance, for example. And Dave talked about a new narrative for change. The phrase he used that I liked a lot was changing how we think of ourselves, which seems to me very much relevant to the work I do. Sander talked about how leadership can be developed, which is totally connected to what I do, which is about actually building skills and capacities. Amika, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but talked about this sense of connection and really action, starting with action at the grassroots level. And Kate Rudd talked about her levels, but the one that really connected with me was agency. And finally, Kate White's shift model feels totally resonant with giving voice to values. So briefly, what giving voice to values is it's a pedagogy. It's an innovative approach to values-driven leadership development. And I created it because I was frustrated with the way ethics were being taught in business schools. I was 10 years at Harvard Business School, and I've spent time at Babson College and Darden School of Business. And I was very frustrated with the way we talked about ethics, because we talked about it as if it was entirely cognitive. We'll give you some dilemmas and you're going to think through them. We're going to build awareness. We're going to teach analysis, and then you'll know how to act. And what I was realizing, and it's totally reinforced by the research that Kate White was just talking about, is that we really need to build a set of skills. I talk about building a moral muscle memory. A lot of it's based on some of the neuroscience that Sanders referred to as well. So I'll just briefly give you a quick example so we can have conversation. But when I was still at Harvard Business School, when we would talk about trying to, and also at other business schools, when we would try and talk about the environment and sustainability in that sense, in that narrow sense of sustainability, we would usually present things as a debate. And we would ask students to take two different sides of an issue related to whether you could make change to move toward a more sustainable operation. And we would ask some of the students to argue why you can't and some to argue why you couldn't. And the idea here was to bring out all the arguments on all sides. And of course, you can imagine what happened. A more narrow and traditional sense of economics, not the regenerative economics we've been talking about today, tended to win the debate. And what I was realizing is that we were doing that with every issue related to values. We were presenting them as these sort of either or kinds of debates. And what I was learning from the neuroscience and from my own experience and from interviewing people who acted on their values is that actually it might be more effective to develop a different teaching tool, which I call a giving voice to values thought experiment, where we don't ask people whether they could do this or that, or even what is right. We give them a scenario with a pro-social positive kind of action in it. And we say, what if you wanted to do this? How could you be successful? And we build the opportunity for people to create scripts and action plans and to rehearse them, to build that habit that I think, was it Sander? One of you was talking about building habit, to build what I call a moral muscle memory, and to peer coach each other and to make this kind of action more likely. So we created a whole curriculum and pedagogy around this. It's been shared literally on all 7 continents. It was originally for business schools, but we now work with businesses and other organizations as well. We've started to work across professions with engineering and medicine, healthcare, the military, law, etc. And I like to tell people that it's at heart, all it is asking a different question. Instead of asking what's the right thing to do, we ask, once you know what you believe the right thing to do is, how could you get it done? And we invite people to practice. And the idea is that if you ask them, if you give the task of creating a script and action plan, it gives people permission to go to that space of creativity. You've brought down the anxiety. You've actually not asked them to commit to something unless they think it's already positive. But we know from the research that when people confront these kinds of conflicts, we tend to react automatically and then rationalize after the fact, post hoc, why it was okay or why it was the only thing we could do. So we're releasing that pressure. We don't want to reinforce that. We want to actually rewire that connection and give people the opportunity to say, well, so what if I were going to do this? How could it get done? So you're actually creating, more quivers, more arrows in your quiver, and we're sharing positive examples, hundreds of examples of people who have faced these kinds of issues. So I'll stop there, but that's basically the idea behind it. And it was so encouraging to hear everyone today, because I think we're all coming to this kind of recognition from different angles and from different experiences. And I think we have to build that kind of wave.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. And I think that speaks more to this general discussion we've been having over the past many months about dismantling paradigms and restrictive worldviews, and giving permission. And I think that was the other thing you mentioned, having permission, which means having conversations like this, which normalize opportunities to talk about compassion, love, connectivity, and all of those things which resonate with people far more deeply. So I think that's really, really wonderful. And I think people have been dropping some links in the chat about where they can find out a bit more about giving voice to values. Dave, you've got your hand up.
Hi, everyone. It's a lovely, wonderful opportunity to be here. We're talking about change. And I think looking back into history leaves clues that we can utilize. I just want to remind everyone, there's a book written in 1962 by Thomas Kuhn. He was a historian of science. In science, the word originally comes from scientia, which means knowledge, but it also means awareness. The title of his book is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. So if I could use a little bit of creative license here, I'll call it the structure of revolutions of awareness or awareness revolutions. There's 4 fundamental traits here, I think, or statements that Kuhn makes. Revolution is a destructive as well as a creative act. 2, normal awareness or science enters a crisis due to a series of anomalies. We're experiencing these anomalies in real time. An awareness revolution occurs when the new paradigm is incommensurate with the old. And we understand that now in the context of planetary health. What we did is not going to work. And number 4, transformation. And those ideas, they don't rise from the gradual process of experimentation and data accumulation, which is what we're led to believe a lot of times, but instead occur outside of normal science, which is what this group is doing, where it's looking for other things that we can use to explain this. So that's really all I just wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. And I think that this comes back to some of the other discussions we were having actually in the Constellation Project, which is really around shifting to that more heart-centered approach and telling new narratives that way, where we need to break old patterns in order for new worlds to emerge. And that was very much the theme of our last discussion circle. Now, I might just pose a question to any or all of the panelists, because, I think that we can see there's certainly pressure to change and there's certainly shifts in attitudes. And I think many of those may be meaningful and others may be less so. And there are clearly some very recalcitrant areas. But are there ways that we can measure change or quantify these shifts? And I'm, again, people working in that space for, I guess, reassurance on one level. But I just wondered if any of you, anybody's looking at how we can measure some of these shifts in business, economics, or even anecdotal things that I think you may be seeing.
Well, I mean, in sustainability, and there's incredible movement towards impact investing, and there are many quantifiable approaches to that. Like, how do you measure impact? Societal, ecological impact. It's an incredible revolution happening in that field, but it becomes very technical, very abstract. So I think in many cases it does not resonate with leadership because it becomes something like too far away, too complex, and too abstract. So I think we're talking about something else than just sort of quantifiable impacts or in quantifiable data points. Like purpose and consciousness, that's very hard to quantify, right? That's qualitative. And I think this is also a new frontier of science, to how to measure and incorporate all the qualitative elements, happiness, well-being, consciousness, and I think that's where we need to learn and grow, and that's where way more science needs to sort of become more sophisticated.
That's good to hear. I mean, I think that's exactly what I was getting at. We need to be measuring different things, and how do we measure these things? That I guess it speaks to what Kate Rudd was talking about too, about the inner development goals, those assets which we need, but they're also the things that bring us the greatest life satisfaction, purpose. They're the things that inspire us to act. They're the things that actually empower us and connect us. So, how do we measure that? And I guess that comes almost round into the public health space. I mean, these spaces should have very blurry edges. There should be more continuity here. But when we think about the health of individuals and the health of communities, we need to be measuring these things and connecting them to economic and other activities of those communities. George, I think you're waving your fingers.
Some discussion of this, but I'd like to bring up the pharmaceutical industry because it is an interesting example of the buried public goods, the public investments that get ignored in the interest of shareholder value. For example, if we look at vaccines, enormous amount of public money was spent on research that went to the development of those vaccines. At the same time, enormous profits being made by the pharmaceutical industries, Pfizer, Moderna. So buried in this system of drug delivery is an enormous common good, which gets buried in the service of private capital. So I'd be interested in hearing from the panel and from other people about ways out of that knot.
Who would like to take that one on?
Well, I think this is a very important question, but I think the key here of my presentation is, and my research basically, is that all corporates and all economies have as purpose the accumulation of money and capital, right? And on top of that, of course, many of them try to serve society and serve the environment, but many of them that's not their core purpose. They're not designed to do that. And this is a real problem. And because we're meeting with very good leaders, many good people in those systems that say, well, even by law, they are supposed to serve or prioritize the interest of shareholders, on top of above other interests. So that's why we need to repurpose the system and individuals working in the system. But that's I think it's incredible big system shift and paradigm shift that is needed and that is happening. But it's very hard if we just take one company at a time or one industry at a time and try to single out one, like the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah, sure. But these multinational companies, these shareholder companies, that they are creations, for over 100, 200 years. And they're embedded in systems. So it's not that easy. And we have to be really patient, persistent and patient. Yeah.
Thanks, Sandra. And I think some of that comes back to looking to the next generation, because this is our opportunity to have a new generation of people who perhaps can help with repurposing narratives, a young generation of young people who don't necessarily...
the development of those vaccines. At the same time, enormous profits being made by the pharmaceutical industries, Pfizer, Moderna. So buried in this system of drug delivery is an enormous common good, which gets buried in the service of private capital. So I'd be interested in hearing from the panel and from other people about ways out of that knot.
Who would like to take that one on?
Well, I think this is a very important question, but I think the key here of my presentation is, and my research basically, is that all corporates and all economies have as purpose the accumulation of money and capital, right? And on top of that, of course, many of them try to serve society and serve the environment, but many of them that's not their core purpose. They're not designed to do that. And this is a real problem. And because we're meeting with very good leaders, many good people in those systems that say, well, I'm even by law, they are supposed to serve or prioritize the interest of shareholders, on top of ethics above other interests. So that's why we need to repurpose the system and individuals working in the system. But that's I think it's incredible big system shift and paradigm shift that is needed and that is happening. But it's very hard if we just take one company at a time or one industry at a time and try to single out one, like the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah, sure. But these multinational companies, these shareholder companies, that they are creations, for over 100, 200 years, and they're embedded in systems. So it's not that easy, and we have to be really patient, persistent, and patient. Yeah.
Thanks, Sandra. And I think some of that comes back to looking to the next generation, because this is our opportunity to have a new generation of people who perhaps can help with repurposing narratives, a young generation of young people who don't necessarily live by those same codes. And then that becomes back to our responsibility for creating an environment for very young people, and I'm talking about children, to actually be immersed in a much more generous, compassionate environment. Dave, you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, thank you, Susan. So just going back to your earlier question, one way to quantify is to take a look at, for example, membership to the UN Global Compact. And that's grown quite considerably over the years. I think the membership now stands at around 16,000 organizations. So these are organizations that have made a commitment to not only to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, but also associated with that, the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so membership numbers there is one way to do that, looking at sustainability statements. Of course, many corporates now are including not only statements about their activities around sustainability, but developing separate documentation around sustainability, so we can take a look at that. Global Reporting Index is another quantifiable tool that we can use to look at increase in interest in that area. So there are a number of ways in which we can do that. And if I could just make another couple of comments. Susan, you were just talking about a new generation. When I think about what Sandra was talking about in terms of repurposing, the importance of purpose as a foundation, if you like, a takeover from mission and vision of organizations is really been paramount in driving through the sort of change that we're hoping to see. And in terms of young people, we've got here in Australia, we've got the Purpose Conference taking place in November in Sydney, which people can look up online if they're interested. And that showcases so many inspiring organizations, not just social enterprises, but other organizational types too. And so that's kind of like the starting point that we want to see in that regard. I think one of the things that I've noted as well in regard to shareholders is that many shareholders now are not just interested in the financial returns that they accrue, but also looking at the activities of the organizations and paying much more attention to those organizations who are actually contributing positively along the lines of the issues that we're talking about in terms of regenerativity, etc. And so that's a significant shift that we've probably seen over the last few years as well.
Well, thanks, David. I'm really pleased that you brought up purpose really as a fundamental thing that already has obviously been raised by others, but purpose is one of those things that we talk about as really critical for physical health, for emotional health, and of course spiritual health of individuals, but also something that connects communities. So again, it really is a fundamental thing that should permeate all of our discussions. Atra, you had your hand up and I didn't get to you in time. Would you still like to jump in?
I just wanted to hear a little bit more about Sandra's experience of working with leaders in the financial industry with your program that you're doing, because you're obviously helping that shift happen. I don't know if you could speak a bit more to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. Yeah, Atara, thank you. Well, I think as it has been said by many people, I think Kate White's research, people are favorably inclined towards each other and towards serving each other, serving their communities and server environment. There's a natural need to be connected and to contribute. And that's what we are discovering. Whoever we meet, whoever we work with, there is always a seed for positive potential. And on top of that, there is often a lot of pain and of people working in the system. They feel conflicted. They feel often they are on the verge of a burnout, or they pretend to be well and extremely successful, but in reality they're suffering somewhere in their lives. And when they discover practices like mindfulness or compassion or any of those positive traits, they discover quite quickly that they need them and that it works for them. Right? That it is what basically it works. It's not the ideology or ethics from a sort of external thing. It's like something innate to their own being and to their own purpose, and that's beautiful to see. And that's why I have decided, after working many years in systems change, to focus on leadership, because when you see this shift happening in an individual leader, the awakening happening, that's very encouraging. And then through people like them, we can impact systems. I mean, they can impact their communities, impact their families, etc., and they can impact their organizations and therefore capitalism as a whole. So it is a form of systems change through individuals. And but we need the kind of know-how that many of us here, are sharing. So thank you for the question.
Thanks, Sandra. And I think this speaks to the importance of the work you're doing and the work that many people are doing in creating spaces for people to come and feel nourished, no matter what their walk of life is. And to actually, as you say, people are feeling burned out. There's this, this crisis of hope and all of these things. And I think that creating these opportunities, like we're doing here today, is so important. And we've had this conversation before at the Garrison Institute and at Nova about the importance of connecting communities and networking networks that are doing these same things so that we can amplify this change. Vanessa.
Hello, everybody. Always a pleasure to be here. And I missed the last Constellation meeting. I know that we are running out of time, but I just wanted to highlight two questions in the chat. Maybe if we have time, one from Alessio. He asks, how do we get more people to demand systemic change? And the other one is from Mona, and is about artificial intelligence. Sander glossed over the idea of de-escalating artificial intelligence analytics in the sphere of economics and manipulating consumership. Any more forward-looking perspectives on that?
Because time is short, we may not be able to dive deep into those areas, but I do want to highlight that we want to talk about AI in a future session. So I think it's an incredibly huge topic. If there's any quick comments from the panel, be grateful, but we haven't got a lot of time left. Anybody?
Susan, I think these would be really wonderful discussions to hold on the hub going forward from this meeting, because there's a lot to dig into for both those questions that were brought up.
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding us all about that. And I think someone can drop the link for that in the chat, because we do have discussions on consciousness, including AI. We have conversations on engagement and social movements. Again, these are ways that we can connect between these meetings. And in terms of how do we build movements, well, that is really exactly what I was saying about holding opportunities like this, connecting with other groups that are doing this. And I think we're really running to the end of our time now. So I think this is when I will start to round up. I do want to thank our speakers. There was so much synergy here, but coming at this from slightly different perspectives. So special thanks to Rebecca, Dave, Sander, Kate Rudd and Kate White, and to Amaka for sharing their video from Katali Foundation, and to all of you who bring your energy, your perspectives and your enthusiasm. And again, I want to thank the Garrison Institute for joining us, and to Lachlan at CorpCom for taking care of our technical aspects and staying up through the night in Melbourne. But the conversation doesn't end here, as I said. So please go to the hub if you want to talk about these things more. There are many different groups that you can join. I'm trusting that someone's putting a link in the chat for me. And our next big annual event is actually in December. It's themed The Seeds of Change, Inspiring a Better Future. And that will be held virtually on December 7th and 8th, and registration and abstracts and art submissions are open now. So we really hope that you will join us for that, and we will send out a bulletin with more information in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. So thank you all again, and wishing you all health and happiness until we meet again. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.